Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting virtual tour with me, Chris, your host, your guide here at Pretty Gritty Tours. And tonight we are discussing one of the most important questions from the area. What is the Tacoma aroma? And I would like to premise this. I'm going to put a disclaimer, little asterisk right at the beginning. There have been many aromas in Tacoma, and you can have your own opinion about it. What do I know? I'm just a guy who has been here for a long time. Over 20 years, cumulative experience as a professional tour guide and historian, head of the Heritage League of Pierce County of Tacoma, who literally wrote the book on the area, available at bookstores near you, Secret Tacoma. But you're entitled to your own opinions about the Tacoma aroma. And if at any point tonight you disagree with me, please let me know in a back and forth in the comments, because I get paid by interaction. So listen, there have been multiple aromas over the year, and we are going to dive into that. That's not an issue. We are going to look at the reason that there's not only been an aroma here, but specifically how it became the local legend that it is, because it's been one of the stains on Tacoma's reputation. Occasionally deserved, but maybe not now. We're going to go here and we'll just dive in. You let me know how it goes along the way. But here's the deal. The Tacoma aroma, what is it? It's the paper mill. All right, there we go. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you. I think that's the easiest answer. Most people blame the West Rock paper mill, but the fact is that the legend of the Tacoma aroma goes far beyond that. And there's a lot of things that we have to look at, because while it seems like such a simple thing, a lot of people take their personal interaction with the aroma and then paint it across the years. The truth is, it's actually surprisingly complicated and difficult, and there have been multiple contributors to this whole thing. And I want to introduce you to them piece by piece in a fashion. So first and foremost, my friends, welcome to Tacoma. We don't mind the smell. And it has been a ubiquitous part of the Tacoma experience for generations. This right here is a picture of the Sigma Chi fraternity from the College of Puget Sound, now University of Puget Sound. And back in 1954, during the Daffodil Parade, they put this little beauty together. It's a Foss tugboat dragging behind it the Tacoma aroma. It's got atomic pile. It's got, you can see a little sign right here that says the world-renowned Tacoma aroma. And basically it's waste, toxic waste. And this is important because there was a period in time where the atomic waste thing became really important, because radioactive waste was being dumped in Puget Sound. And more than anything else tonight, we need to address the fact that Commencement Bay, Puget Sound, has been grossly mistreated by industry over the years. And that has been a huge, almost dominating contributor to the fact that there's been a Tacoma aroma. The things that I want to talk to you about tonight, though, we're going to break down. So let's look at the origin. You go way back to the time when this is tribal land for the Puyallup tribe. Here's one of the earliest pictures of Puyallup tribal canoes down on the waterfront. Here is one of the earliest days of Tacoma as a boom town and a terminus for the railroad. And one of the things that you notice immediately, I hope, is the fact that Tacoma has an intrinsic, indelible connection to the water. When you're looking at this here, that's the Foss waterway. That's the city waterway. And you can see the tidal zone right here. Two things that are important about that. The first is that there is a funk that comes with the ocean. Tacoma is tied to the waterway. But its fact is that also that's an industrial site. The thing that made Tacoma so desirable for the railroad was that it was an international shipping port with a naturally deep water port. So you could bring a train onto that shallow tide flat and then still have a tall ship of any class arrive from around the world. Geographically, though, those lend themselves to smelling bad, both industry and tide flats. If you've ever been around a tide flat, industrial or not, it smells gross. And that's something that leads to the Tacoma aroma. And I don't want to erase that from this narrative. When you look at those early pictures of Tacoma, you see both tide flat and industry coming in the earliest days of this. And you can actually see the phrase Tacoma aroma arrive as early as the 1880s. This is a newspaper clipping from the earliest days of Tacoma, in which Seattle is basically trying to smear our reputation as a place of value. And that is an important contributor to this whole thing as well. Tacoma, for its prettiness and its grittiness, has been many things. But when it was selected to be the terminus for the Transcontinental Railroad's northern route, Seattle got pretty huffy about it and started to diminish the reputation of Tacoma in print and press. And those historic materials, those ephemera, have affected us ever since. And so Seattle's like mean girl attitude has also contributed to the legend of the Tacoma aroma. So I don't want to leave that out there. But here's the thing. The earliest reference to the Tacoma aroma, like the words Tacoma aroma being put together, come from one of our local benefactors, a guy who freaking loved this city, and his name was George Francis Train. He is notable for being super rich, a investor to the railroad, which you would have to be if your last name was Train. But also, this is the dude that established the legend of Around the World in 80 Days. He had done 3 separate around the world journeys. One of them inspired Jules Verne to write the story Around the World in 80 Days. And then later, when American journalist Nellie Bly, she beat George's record, he left on a journey from Tacoma all the way around the world and arrived back here in Tacoma in a record 60-something days. The guy was a legend. He was undeniably insane, but when you're rich, somehow people let it slide. And he was a booster of the Tacoma area. And when he first coins the phrase Tacoma aroma, it was a positive thing, which, again, he was crazy. So he first says, Tacoma, Tacoma, aroma, aroma, the smell of an old graveyard. Seattle, Seattle, a rattle, return to the boom, Villard. And let me break this down for you. At the time when he wrote this in 1886, a graveyard was a peaceful picnic site. It was a desirable location, not associated with death and rot, but with a wonderful Sunday picnic and commemorating those who had come before you. When he's talking about Seattle, he's saying death rattle. And so this now has not aged well. But at the time, he was trying to describe Tacoma as a positive place. And in this back and forth that he had with Seattle, he was saying that Tacoma was the place to be. Seattle was on its way out. Well, hindsight is 20/20, my friends, but here's a different one. Tacoma, Tacoma, ambrosia, aroma. Seattle, Seattle, death rattle. And this article from 1897 is comparing Tacoma and its aroma to the food of the gods, the ambrosia, and Seattle to the death rattle that comes with an imminent demise. This goes back and forth over the years, with Seattle and Tacoma having a back and forth as to which town metaphorically smells better. But that phrase Tacoma aroma has a delicious flavor to it. The fact that it sounds good and rhymes doesn't help Tacoma over the years. And let's be honest, at its lowest, Tacoma has smelled bad. Like, it stinks, right? And part of this comes from the fact that there's an industrial site on the Tacoma Tide Flats and a prevailing wind. Out of the north, there has been a consistent and prevalent wind that blows down into Commencement Bay, which is itself a low depression. When you look at the industrial tide flats down here, this is the area where the Port of Tacoma and all of the various industries over the years have been. It's a low area. You can see that it's bounded on either side by these high sort of guardrails left behind from glacial recession. And so if you have a low spot where there's a wind that blows into it, you're going to retain some smells in that low cauldron. If the smells are industrial, specifically in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, they're gonna smell bad. So yes, Seattle being mean, Fife aroma doesn't sound the same. And this is a great question. That statue that's in front of Union Station, made by local artist Larry, is representative of George Francis Train. It's not an exact likeness of him, but it was modeled very much after him. So yeah, the OG rap battles of the day, Seattle and Tacoma having like poetry disses in the newspaper. There have been other contributors to the Tacoma aroma. This is actually a picture of the steam plant that was down on the waterfront. They used to burn, this is like a hog fuel. It's essentially like a wet wood pulp that could be burned to create steam heat to power and heat the city. And this is a picture from when the workers had to go down because a skunk got sucked into the system and mulched and sprayed pretty aggressively before it then also died inside. There's a metaphor in there somewhere. I'm not gonna bring it out for you. You're gonna have to do that heavy lifting yourself. But I have created this helpful timeline of aromas in Tacoma and their various debuts on the scene. Because for me, these are the greatest contributors to not only the legend, but the actual stench that has lurked on the tide flats from the earliest days. Our first one in 1888 comes from the Tacoma smelter. Then by 1928, the St. Regis Paper Company. In the 1940s, that skunk was discovered there at the Tacoma steam plant. By 1948, we had the Kraft Paper Company. And then in the 1960s, the album, the LP, The Aroma of Tacoma was released. 1971, the Darling plant opened. In 1984, Bruce Springsteen vomits here in Tacoma. And then in 1997, sewer tanks were unsealed. And that's our journey tonight, my friends. That's your table of contents. I hope you're ready for it, because I know that I am. Shall we discuss the aroma of Tacoma in depth? I was hoping you'd say yes. So before we discuss the historic contributors to this, what creates the aroma? Overwhelmingly, it's sulfur. Even in the decomposition of trash, there is a release of sulfur. When you look at peer-reviewed papers about sulfur contamination or exposure, it's not great. You can see at the very far left of our scale, there's a bad odor, that rotten egg scent that comes from sulfur. But at greater than 750 parts per million H2S in the air, what you're looking at is death, right? So sulfur smells bad. It is our body's response to something that could kill us, alerting us early on that we need to get away from it. And most of the things that have smelled bad that have contributed to the Tacoma aroma have come from sulfur emissions. The most, I think, prolific early on is the smelter. This is the earliest picture I have of the Tacoma smelter. This would later become the town site of Ruston. When the Tacoma smelter was managed by William Rust, the founder of Ruston, he later turned it over to the Asarco company, who turned it into this with their iconic 571-foot smokestack and copper production facility out there on what is now the Ruston area. And something I want to point out to you, this is the pond. This is the toxic waste pond. This is now essentially the cul-de-sac that is out there. But in its heyday, Asarco was producing hundreds of thousands of tons of refined copper and arsenic and lead. And one of the byproducts of this smelting operation was airborne pollutants, not the least of which was sulfur. That iconic 571-foot smokestack that was supposed to send the pollutants out into space and keep them away from anybody else ended up creating this toxic bloom area. These areas in the dark here throughout Commencement Bay and Puget Sound are areas that have the most significant portion of pollution, but all of these colored sections are not great. And the Asarco smelting operation smelled bad. Not only was it one of the most vicious contributors to pollution in the area, but it was the original Tacoma aroma in a negative sense. George Francis Train tried to popularize the idea of a Tacoma aroma, because it rhymed, as a positive smell of flowers on a Sunday in a peaceful garden of opportunity. And then Asarco came along and created a new Tacoma aroma, and one that smelled rancid and dank. But people loved it because George Francis was right on the right path. People early on knew that even though it smelled bad, it smelled like jobs. The Asarco plant, to this day, though a known contributor to toxic pollutants and cancer-causing chemicals in the area, is something that is beloved by multiple generations because it created possibility in a place that didn't exist before. And so people in the town site of Ruston still sometimes will talk fondly of the Asarco facility as if it was a great benefactor to the area. And, it was at an incredible cost to the region and took with a viciousness that can't be overstated. But it did take care of its own in a way. And yeah, there was a prevalent smell throughout the area. A lot of it came from Asarco, but it wasn't the only contributor to the aroma. So we also need to talk about just the general stench of Tacoma. This is a picture from 1948 when homeowners and community members reached out again and again to the Tacoma Times because there was an open sewer. This is open sewage in a mill pond that children were playing in. And not only was there just like turds floating past children, like toddlers, but rats, disease-carrying mosquitoes, all of this was prevalent in the area, and it was contaminating the city water supply. So this is actually from a pictorial review done by the Tacoma Times, where they were trying to showcase the fact that in 1948, there was a hazardous amount of health conditions where open sewage was flowing in the area. And the response of the city was to create a sewage plant. This is the one that's down on the tide flats today. There are two major sewage treatment plants in the city of Tacoma. One of the original ones down on the tide flats, and then, of course, the one that's in Mason Gulch towards the north end of Tacoma, which is an award-winning facility that continuously gets gold medal standards for its ecological treatment of sewage in the area, but also just its ability to not smell bad while doing that. Pretty impressive, honestly. Now, this one down on the tide flats is a contributor to the Tacoma aroma. This is where it's located right now, just along the Puyallup River. Here's an overview of it from the satellite images. But in 1997, it had backed up and needed to be emptied out. And that's every bit as bad as it sounds. So the city of Tacoma and the sewage treatment facility had to empty out all of these emaciating tanks and pour it into, I'm sad to say, an open lagoon. Here's what happened. This is a digester. There are multiple of these down on the waterfront. You can see them located here. A digester's job is to take raw sewage and create biogas, slurry, and then filter it out by taking those heavier waste materials, lowering them to the bottom, turning them into a slurry, which can be treated, offsetting the biogas from this process. And they're massive. A digester is huge. And years, decades of sewage ended up in the digesters down there along the Puyallup River. And when they had to be emptied out, they created some new facilities, but all of it got pumped out into an open air lagoon right down there along the tide flats. So imagine 1997, right? You're cruising along I-5. There's a prevalent wind coming from the north. You're in a low area, a depression bounded by mountains and gulches and ridges all around you. You're in a caldera of darkness. And there is an open air lagoon full of decades of Tacoma shit. Of course it's going to smell bad. And it really contributed to this idea of the Tacoma aroma. The other problem is the waterway, the Foss waterway today, one's called the City Waterway, has an outflow into it. So, maybe you've been down to the Foss waterway at some point. That's a natural inlet, essentially. It doesn't have anything that really flows into it except storm drains. There are large open storm drain outflows that come from the very southern end of that and pour into the waterway. And over the years, those took everything from the city and then poured it into the waterfront there. And we're not just talking pollutants from the area, but poop. If a dog poops on the sidewalk, if a bird poops, if somebody else poops, all of that feces gets filtered down through storm drains when it rains, which, hey, heads up, that happens a lot in Tacoma. And as they say, if it hits the ground, it hits the sound. And so all of this fecal matter, not just from the open air lagoons, but from the city at large, was at one point flowing into the waterways. And that was a huge contributor to the aroma of Tacoma. Yes, it's disgusting. Now, here's a great question. What is the perimeter of the Tacoma aroma? It is, I think, arguably at its worst at that bend of I-5. People, you ask anyone, right? Like NPR's Hometown Stories comes through and people are like, where's the Tacoma aroma? People talk about rolling up their windows, passing by Tacoma on I-5. And that is metaphorically and geographically the lowest point, right? The area starts to slope up past that. Like McKinley Hill is a ridge, Browns Point is a ridge, north end of Tacoma is a ridge, but the tide flats is kind of the basin for this whole thing, and I-5 bisects it perfectly. So when you're looking at the Tacoma aroma, depending on the wind, it could make its way all the way up to Federal Way, but that's not really the case. Usually we're looking at, South Tacoma Way, downtown Tacoma, the bend of I-5. It's not the only contributor. Of course, the most famous is the mill. And in 1959, here's a picture of the St. Regis Paper Co., the Kraft Pulp Mill. All of these various paper mills over the years capitalized on the fact that Tacoma was a lumber town, right? West Rock was the most recent of the paper mills in the area. Lumbertown produces timber, but the large grade timber eventually doesn't become the main economic resource for the area. Trees used for paper pulp and then paper become really an economically viable thing. But in that process of creating paper, a huge amount of sulfur is created. And you can see, like looking at the smokestacks here, these are blowing due south, straight into that I-5 corridor. And so you get a Tacoma aroma, right? You have to hose this sucker down. And every picture you have of a paper mill, like look at these suckers. They're all blowing south right down onto every single thing. Like the Hooker chemical plant, the Kraft paper mill, all of these. Even today, the oil refinery that's down on the tide flats, all of it blows due south right onto I-5. And not just I-5, but conjure for a moment, if you can, my friends, what great entertainment site is directly in the path of that prevalent wind and all the aromas? You guessed it, the Tacoma Dome. And so this is kind of where the legend of the aroma hits such a degree that people can no longer escape it. And it happens with the boss. Back in the 1980s, Bruce Springsteen was supposed to perform at the Tacoma Dome and canceled his freaking concert because he was so nauseous that he vomited. Now, historians today will confer the story that this was in fact a case of the stomach flu, but people could not let it go that what had happened was that the aroma of Tacoma was so strong that Bruce Springsteen got physically ill and had to flee town. Just because he got a stomach bug here doesn't mean that we should suffer in perpetuity. But it got so bad that the city of Tacoma hired an EPA commission to come out and send air quality control people to go and see what were the aromas of Tacoma, and were they dangerous? Were they noxious? Was it something we should be concerned about? Because, by goodness, Bruce Springsteen was getting so sick out here. If we can't keep the boss, how are we going to keep the everyday workers in the Tacoma area? Now, no shade to Bruce Springsteen. I get it. You had an upset tummy. You had to flee. But the damage was done. And as a PR center, that was a nightmare. So Tacoma looks to rebrand. And I got to give some credit to the tourism board of the 1990s. They decided to try and retell the story of the Tacoma Aroma with a scratch and sniff tourist manual that they sent out throughout the region. And it was positive stuff, right? It was like daffodils, almond roca, the positive sense of Tacoma in a scratch and sniff catalog to highlight the aromas of Tacoma. And the Tacoma Pierce County Visitors and Convention Bureau marketed this thing out there to be like, hey guys, there's more than just pulp mills out here. We smell delicious. But it was an uphill battle because of Banjo Records. Now, for me, this is the most definitive blow to Tacoma's reputation, because it smelled bad, but tons of towns smell bad. Boston literally had a garbage island that burned for over a decade. Manhattan in the summer still smells like trash. Lewiston, Idaho will forever smell like paper mill, but no place has suffered as definitively as Tacoma. And it's because of the mnemonics. Tacoma Aroma is delicious to say. And Banjo Records, Jim Torrance and Dom Lemon released this 45 vinyl press of the Tacoma Aroma. And when it comes out, it plays in jukeboxes across the country. You can still find it on YouTube. I admit it's catchy. I'm not going to do it any justice, but the lyrics are, the aroma of Tacoma takes your breath away. You can tell it, you can smell it when you're 14 miles away. From the great Olympic Mountains to the tide flats by the shore, that aroma will be with us for now and evermore. As you drive along the highway, that scenery's sublime, but the flowers smell like pulp mill almost all the time. The aroma of Tacoma, cure a headache cold any day. In fact, we guarantee it to take your breath away. These hack job assassins forever taint the reputation of Tacoma with an undeniably catchy song. I can't take that away from them. It's good. Look it up later. And man, it's worth it. But it makes people think that this place stinks forevermore. And it doesn't. But it did for a while. And honestly, one of the worst parts of it for me are the rendering plants. Darling rendering plant, right? So created feed ingredients. I believe 60 to 70% of their product were feed ingredients. We're talking like dog food, right? And what they do is they take waste meat, is how it's described. We're talking things that are left over after butchering or actual roadkill, animals that are no longer viable for anything else. And, quote, chunks of animals in various states of decay were loaded by conveyor belt into big vats at the plant and boiled for hours. Sometimes it smelled like hot dogs, and sometimes it smelled like cattle. They render it down into a product that can be sold. And when Darling were representing themselves online, it's like raw material collected, not scraped decaying carcass off the side of the road and boiled it down into something for your friend. But all of this material was coming into the Darling plant and being rendered down into a product that would later be fed to other creatures, notably your pal at home. It's not great, my friends, but listen, scavengers are an essential part of any ecosystem. And the Darling plant was a big part of the industry here in the Tacoma area. It is one of the worst smells that ever existed for the Tacoma aroma. I think there is a sharpness and astringency to the Kraft and Westrock paper mills, specifically Kraft. Kraft had nowhere near the filtration systems that Westrock did, but there's something like hindbrain nauseating about a molten vat of decayed animal parts, processing them down into something to be turned into a food. Yikes. So Westrock, Kraft, Darling, not great. But have there been other aromas? Let's focus on the pretty for a moment, my friends. Absolutely. Down on the tide flats, you can often smell the almond roca, the Brown and Haley production. This is the Brown and Haley factory that's been there since the early 1900s, producing all of the candies, mountain bars, and almond roca. This is the only production facility that they have globally. It has been there from the start. It was originally an late 1800s shoe factory converted to the Brown and Haley Candy Company. And on a good day, if you catch the wind just right, it smells like chocolate. But also potatoes, fry oil, and pickles. That's right, Nally's Valley potato chips also begins in the area. Mr. Nally starts a line of potato chips and, of course, chili. He is one of the most prominent investors in the area, and the old pickle vats, not just potato chips, but Nally Valley pickles were a big thing. And so that briny, vinegary smell and the potato chips also used to really convalesce down in that low area. Because when you look at Tacoma from above, right, that cauldron of lowland area, this is the tide flats here, but just over here, that gulch that creates Nally Valley, which I'll be honest with you, mostly smells like weed today because there are cannabis facilities down there, no longer potato chip production, but it holds the scent and you drive through it. And no amount of air filtration can truly defang the smells of Tacoma. The Aroma is a fierce competitor for many things, but also lumber. Over the years, there have been a variety of lumber production facilities, furniture makers, craft paper mills. All of those trees in their various states have had smells down there. But the Aroma really got to its worst period in the 60s, 70s, and then by the late 80s, it got so bad that people were bringing in complaints, not just about it smelling bad, but about being a health concern. This is the Foss waterway when it was the city waterway. And you can see all of these different industries and production facilities here, not just creating jobs and products, but creating really toxic pollution and waste and dumping it directly into the water here, which is why by the 1990s, the city of Tacoma and various boosters throughout the area led a revitalization effort to turn Tacoma into this. The waterway is exponentially cleaner than it used to be. The effort, like you look at the air quality even, it's better than it ever was. And you look at the cleanup of the area here, so much industrial waste removed from the area. And today, Port of Tacoma itself is an entity that is buying up the properties that used to be leased by different industries. I do think that's worth noting. Port of Tacoma is an area, but the Port of Tacoma is also an entity. And there used to be various businesses that would have space down on the tide flats, but they weren't Port of Tacoma. The Port of Tacoma commissioner now takes on a lot of these properties, does a tremendous amount of ecological cleanup, trying to make them viable, and then has stewardship of the area. So the remnants of industrial waste have gotten better. The area has gotten cleaner, And the major contributors to the original Tacoma Aroma are gone. Asarco disbanded by the late 70s. It was going bankrupt. They were gone. It's now been replaced by that Ruston complex. West Rock has closed just in the last few years. The Darling Animal Plant is closed. And there has been a tremendous rebound in sea life, for better or for worse. Because remember, this sea life is a valuable part of our ecosystem, but it smells like trash. The king tides are a great reminder that the aroma of Tacoma goes beyond industrial contributors, that sea life in its various forms, both active and dead, offsets and degasses bad smells. At a low tide in Tacoma, you can smell the decomp of a lot of biomass, and it creates that ubiquitous sulfur that we addressed in the earliest days. The Tacoma aroma was early on, before anybody other than the Puyallup tribe was here. It was that rot at low tide, held here by a prevailing northern wind and that low bowl of the tide flats. And it's still here today, because even though West Rock and Darling and Asarco are gone, we still have a lot of sea life that creates toxic, nasty sulfur. And at a low tide, it's particularly pungent, and you can still have it. So while we have a waterfront that is continuously being cleaned, in fact, all of these pylons have now been removed because of the toxic creosote on them, the aroma of Tacoma will always be here. Sometimes it's good, mostly it's bad. But one thing I would like you to know is that it's nuanced. It hasn't just been one thing. It has been many industries over the years, some of them natural, some of them not. And more than anything, I think its persistence in the zeitgeist comes from the fact that it sounds good, right? Like our early booster, George Francis Train, used it as a marketing tool because Tacoma Aroma sounds good. It feels good in the mouth. But also it has been popularized as a hit job on a 45 vinyl album. It has been used as the reason that Bruce Springsteen couldn't be in town. It is a part of our identity. And you know me, I like to highlight the gritty as well as the pretty. So own your aroma, Tacoma. It is a part of who we are. And sometimes it's here, sometimes it's not. But I will say this. Now, in 2025, the aroma of Tacoma is perhaps better than it has ever been in this city's history. I'll leave it at that. So, my friends, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope this clears up any questions you may have had about the aroma of Tacoma. And again, if for any reason you feel like disagreeing with me, that's awesome. Really get into a heated debate about it. Share it with your friends. Tell them to join you. The more shares and comments that you have, the more likely I am to change my mind. With that, my friends, get on out there, stay curious, and keep on exploring.